Good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you find yourself, and welcome to Building Decarbonization Coalition Presents, our webinar series on the hottest topics, greatest thinkers, and biggest trends in building decarbonization. My name is Panama Bartholomew. I'm the director for the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and I am just terribly excited about today's session. We have Grayson Caldwell from Bellwether Coffee. They said it couldn't be done, that you can't do coffee without natural gas. And in fact, you can do excellent coffee, all electric, emissions free for the roasting. And I'm really excited to have Grayson talk to us about Bellwether Coffee and how they're leading this revolution in coffee roasting. But first, just some information about the Building Decarbonization Coalition. We are a coalition of energy providers, manufacturers of heating equipment, the design and construction community, local governments, and non-governmental organizations working together to completely eliminate pollution from the built environment. Back in 2019, which seems like a long time ago at this point, a totally different world, we adopted together as a coalition a roadmap for California, laying out how we think we go about eliminating pollution from buildings here in the state. And in that roadmap, we laid out some numerical goals about how we go about achieving this. We said that we should be adopting building codes or other regulations that make sure that we're not digging the hole any deeper by requiring all new buildings that are built be emissions free by a certain date. And that the state of California should be adopting policies that enable the elimination of pollution from the existing building stock. Financing policies, incentive policies, and regulatory policies that really find us a way to get the pollution from buildings out of our atmosphere and out of our communities. Inherent behind that is some targets for the sale of critical technologies such as heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. And we all came together and agreed that by 2030, California should have policies that are ensuring that heat pumps are 100% of sales for water heating and space heating by that point. But in order to achieve those larger numerical goals, we also recognize that a series of more market-based goals are going to have to be achieved that you see up on the screen. And looking at about 35 to 40 different barriers to building electrification, the coalition that developed the roadmap, we identified these 5 major things that we're going to have to achieve if we're going to be able to totally eliminate pollution from the built environment. Number 1, increasing awareness of building electrification across the board for all stakeholders. Number 2, making sure that people who are having their buildings electrified actually have a good value proposition, not only on buying a new all-electric building or retrofitting their building and the capital costs, but also the operating costs of that all-electric building. Needs to be positive for the consumer. Number 3, we actually need to build an industry off of this. And if you're going to build an industry off of products, people need to be able to make money. And so we need to be able to have installers and builders, realtors, and other parts of the supply chain actually be able to make money off of installing and providing all electric options. Number 4, the supply chain has to be robust. We need to be sending clear market signals to the supply chain about this is where California is going on this time frame, these kind of standards, and we need to help getting barriers to the supply chain out of the way, such as a lack of adequate electrical infrastructure in buildings. And number 5, finally, we need to align all of our policies so that our policies are all pushing in one direction towards building electrification. So our affordable housing policies, our energy efficiency policies, our clean air policies should all be aligned together to make sure we're all pushing in the same direction. This webinar series is one of many things that the Building Decarbonization Coalition does under that first goal around raising awareness. And this webinar series is an opportunity for us monthly to bring in some of the top thinkers and doers in the space, such as Grayson, you're about to hear from, to talk about what are the trends, what's on the horizon, what needs to be done, and what are the technologies and solutions that are coming to the market to allow us to meet our goals. And so we really thank you for joining us today and all of the other webinars that you joined us for as our attempt to help to really raise awareness around the benefits of all electric buildings. And so just some details about upcoming webinars. We have a very exciting one coming up next month. Saul Griffith, the prophet The visionary, the one and only Saul Griffith, will be joining us from Rewiring America to lay out Rewiring America's vision for all electric future for America. He'll be coming and talking about their manifesto, what they're working on in Washington, D.C. with the Biden administration, and how they think we go about electrifying billions of machines across America. So please join us for that. You can sign up at our events page, buildingdecarb.org/upcoming-events. So just a few logistics. So we had over 130 organizations register for this event, and so we keep everybody muted. Please ask your questions via chat, and we'll either read them to Grayson or we'll ask you to go off of mute and ask the questions yourself. This webinar is being recorded, and members of the coalition can access this recording. It's one of many great benefits about being a member of this coalition. All of our library of excellent speakers and visionaries and leaders like Grayson, all of those webinars are in our members page. And it's one of many great member benefits you can get by being a member of the coalition. So please, if you're not a member, do consider joining us at buildingdecarb.org/join to become a member. Incredibly affordable membership rates and a ton of benefits and an opportunity to become part of a community of leaders in this space. And so with that, I am very, very pleased to welcome Grayson Caldwell. Grayson is the head of sustainability for Bellwether Coffee. They're an all-electric, emissions-free. Now, not the kind of emissions we like from roasting coffee, like the smell of coffee roasting, but we're talking about the carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, nitrogen oxides that would come from doing it with gas. They're the first zero carbon coffee roasting company in the world, and they're also a member of the coalition, which we thank Grayson and Bellwether for, and we're very excited to have Grayson come and talk about Bellwether's journey and their view on the role of electrification in food service and where food service is at right now. And so with that, Grayson, thank you so much for joining us. I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Panama. As Panama mentioned, my name is Grayson Caldwell. I am the head of sustainability at Bellwether. Sorry, I want to be able to see my screen, not myself. One moment. We practiced this. I should know how to do it now. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
We're just seeing you.
Yeah,
just seeing me. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what's happening. Can you see my screen now?
We cannot. It says waiting to view Grayson's Caldwell's screen. So it should be under show, now viewing. There we go. Yep.
Okay. When I do present though, I lose my ability to see my slides.
Okay.
Let me try one more time. Okay, does this work?
It does.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So as Panama mentioned, my name is Grayson Caldwell. I'm the head of sustainability at Bellwether Coffee. We are based in Berkeley, California, and we are on the mission to transform how coffee is roasted and make the coffee industry more sustainable. So I wanted to start off with a few quick stats about what the coffee industry looks like. It's an over $460 billion global industry. And in the United States alone, we consume over 400 million cups of coffee a day, which is wild. So much coffee. And the roasting stage of the coffee supply chain accounts for 15% of the coffee industry's total carbon footprint. And on the right, you'll see a picture of a traditional natural gas powered coffee roaster. And these are part of a traditional hub and spoke model where coffee is roasted centrally and distributed to coffee shops around the United States. And it's really carbon intensive. It emits smoke, particulates, and VOCs into the air. And the US alone produces over 8 billion pounds of roasted coffee every year. And so you can imagine that these harmful emissions and smoke and particulates are not sustainable for us to continue roasting coffee in this way. So we invented the Bellwether coffee roaster. It's the most sustainable coffee roaster in the world, both in terms of air quality and energy use. So we use a first of its kind recirculating technology that eliminates particulates and VOCs that are typical during a roast cycle, which damage lung tissue and exacerbate respiratory health concerns. And the all-electric coffee roaster versus a traditional natural gas-powered roaster also reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And as you can imagine, the national electric grid right now is only run on 17% renewable energy. But as we see an increase in renewable capacity, then the Bellwether roaster continues to become a cleaner and greener option for coffee roasting. And in addition to the carbon footprint savings from roasting on a Bellwether roaster, it also enables coffee shops to roast in-house. So the Bellwether coffee roaster, it's about the size of a refrigerator. You literally plug it in. It doesn't require any ventilation, permitting, and so coffee shops are now able to roast on site, which eliminates the hub and spoke model. So there's the carbon footprint savings, but there's additional transportation and packaging savings associated with running or roasting coffee on a Bellwether roaster. And so this picture on the right is actually one of our customers, Greenline Coffee, who roast in Philadelphia. They have a Bellwether roaster in one central location, and then they actually have 6 local coffee shops in Philadelphia where they just do localized distribution from roasting on a Bellwether, and they power their Bellwether totally on solar power. So further deepening their environmental savings. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into what it looks like from roasting on a Bellwether versus a traditional natural gas powered roaster. So Bellwether runs 100% on electricity. Traditional roasting models, they run on about 90 to 95% natural gas and 10% electricity. And they also have these afterburners that are attached to them, which just pump natural gas into them to be able to eliminate the VOCs. But it depends on state by state requirements whether afterburners are required. And if they're not required, all of the VOCs and particulate matter just go up into the air. And Bellwether, we have this recirculating technology, runs 100% on electricity, and it reduces all of the VOCs and particulate matter associated with the roast cycle. And in addition, the transportation and packaging savings. So as I mentioned before, there's the hub and spoke model that's associated with natural gas powered roasters. And so it's roasted in a centralized distribution center, and then it's packaged into smaller retail bags that aren't recyclable and distributed to different coffee shops. Versus the Bellwether, you are able to take coffee from origin, it arrives to a port in the United States, and it's shipped directly to your coffee shop where you're able to roast on site. So there's no extra packaging that's associated. So you can imagine you're buying a drip coffee from your local coffee shop, and it goes from the bag that it was packaged in origin, arrives to your coffee shop, and then the coffee's roasted and poured into your daily drip coffee. So no extra packaging or transportation associated with this model. So last year, we hired a third-party consulting firm called Boundless Impact Assessment who conducted a life cycle assessment for us. We wanted to actually have the data to see how the Bellwether compared to a natural gas powered roaster. And we looked at a few different case studies within this life cycle assessment. And one that I find really impactful is looking at Costa Rican coffee. The coffee is grown in Costa Rica. It's shipped to Seattle I'll let your brains wander to imagine who could be roasting in Seattle, and then it's distributed across the United States to local coffee shops. And so you can see in this legacy model, there's the roasting, there's the packaging, and the transportation. And then you look at the Bellwether, it switches that from it's Costa Rican coffee roasted in Costa Rica on a Bellwether. And you see this dramatic reduction of 82% when you look at the full value chain of coffee from transportation, packaging, and roasting. And then on the right, you'll see the additional VOC and particulate matter savings, where you see a 30 and 40% reduction from the legacy traditional gas-powered roaster to the Bellwether. And just for context, Costa Rica's energy mix is run almost entirely on renewables, 98%. And so as the United States starts to get greener in terms of our electric grid, we can see these savings in the United States as well. And so this is looking at the actual roast cycle of, so taking out the additional savings from packaging and roasting. What is the environmental savings if you're just looking at a Bellwether versus a traditional natural gas powered roaster? And we see a reduction in the carbon footprint by 87%. So that's saving 2.077 pounds of CO2 emissions per pound of roasted coffee. And so if you want to look at the impact of a Bellwether over a lifetime, that's over 400,000 pounds of CO2 emissions avoided. It's keeping a car off the road for almost 500,000 miles. It's turning off the electricity in 36 homes for an entire year, or it's the equivalent of 67 tons of waste being recycled instead of landfilled. There are over 30,000 specialty coffee shops in the United States. So this is the impact of one Bellwether roaster. But imagine if even just 10% of coffee shops in the United States were roasting on a Bellwether, the environmental impact of that is huge. And natural gas bans can really be a huge driver for more coffee shops adopting the Bellwether technology. We've seen in the solar and electric vehicle markets, the policy regulations really have the potential to drive, they drove big change in electric vehicle adoption, and they also have the potential to drive big change in the coffee industry as well. And arguably, awareness around bans still remains low, but momentum's increasing. In fact, Pam and I were talking right before the webinar started that it was just passed in Sacramento 2 weeks ago. And so as we see more and more natural gas bans being passed, the only solution that exists for coffee roasting is the Bellwether coffee roaster. And just to drive that point home, like no new gas hookups means no new gas powered roasters. And so all electric roasting is the future for the coffee industry. And in addition to the natural gas bans, we've seen this multi-industry movement towards sustainability. You look at the auto industry making a move towards driving electric. You look at the big tech companies who are making huge commitments towards renewable and being 100% carbon neutral by a certain date. The food and beverage industry, everywhere from alternative meat companies to dairy-free milk options. And the coffee industry doesn't want to be left behind. And so we've seen the big coffee companies like Nestle and Starbucks also set sustainability goals. And so it's really an exciting time to think about what the future holds for the coffee industry, as you know, we're seeing every industry moving towards more environmental sustainability. And then I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So in my introduction, I failed to mention that, so half of my work is around the environmental impact of what we do as Bellwether. And then the other half of my work is really around farmer equity and how can we ensure that coffee producers are being paid a fair wage. So if you've never visited a coffee farm, which most people haven't, poverty is an enduring crisis in the coffee land. The pricing structures that exist of how we pay coffee producers are really outdated. If you look at prices in green coffee, they've decreased in real terms by 67% over the last 40 years. And 80% of smallholder coffee farmers are living in poverty. There are 12 million coffee growing farmers around the world, and most of them are smallholder farmers, which means that they are operating on or growing coffee on less than 3 hectares of land. And this poverty exists with other problems like La Roya, which is a coffee leaf rust, which can wipe out an entire producer's coffee farm. There's climate change, there's COVID that hit rural communities as hard as it hit the United States. There's a shortage of laborers and a ton of other problems that coffee farmers are also facing. And because of this, many farmers are leaving coffee altogether, which really threatens the long-term stability of the global supply chain. If there aren't coffee farmers growing coffee, we don't have an industry at all. And so we created a new pricing model that's called verified living income. And it really flips how coffee prices have been set traditionally to determine a new green coffee price that's based on farmers' livelihood needs. So verified living income, it's the minimum price that farmers need to receive to reach a living income, given current production realities. And so a living income is determined, it's a living income benchmark that looks at a culturally appropriate, nutritious, low-cost diet, decent housing, other basic needs like education, clothing, transportation, and healthcare, and also setting money aside for unexpected costs or events that may come up. So verified living income, it's the first truly farmer-centric, data-driven, and results-oriented price discovery model. And so just to see this visually, it looks at the cost of production. So this is how much does it cost a coffee farmer to produce coffee. It looks at labor that they're paying for themselves and for day laborers who come to help out with harvest. It looks at equipment cost, cooperative fees, utilities, transporting coffee from the fields to the mill, fertilizer, and etc. And then it overlays that living income benchmark that we just looked at, divides it by the farm size and the yield to come up with a farm gate price. So a farm gate price is what a producer is actually paid at the farm's gate. So how much a farmer receives per pound of coffee that they're selling. So last year, over the last 18 months, we worked with a cooperative in ASOPEP, who's in Tolima, Colombia. And we worked with 38 producers in this group to collect data over a year, which included 2 harvests. In Colombia, they actually have 2 harvests, which is different than most origins. And we found their total cost of production, overlaid the living income benchmark. And we actually found that the price that we needed to be paying to reach this living income base price was $1.89 per pound. And when we looked at the contracts that we had paid before, and we had to actually increase our prices by 20%. And Bellwether as a company, we've always been committed to farmer equity, and how we were buying coffee previously before we had implemented verified living income was we had a set of buying standards that emulated the industry's best practices. And we still found before we had this data to really fact check the prices that we were setting, we thought we were paying fair wages. But when we found this data, we learned that we actually needed to increase our prices by 20%. And so we are making a commitment that we're going to be scaling verified living income across all of our supply chains in Latin America by 2023. And then we'll also be launching additional pilots in Asia and Africa to see how this work can really scale across other geographies as well. And I mentioned this, I know that thinking about the Building Decarbonization Coalition, farmer equity doesn't feel totally aligned with that, but a lot of the carbon footprint from the coffee industry actually comes back down to the farm level as well. But without paying coffee farmers fair prices, we're putting the burden on producers to make changes at the farm level to decrease their carbon footprint without actually paying them enough to be able to implement those. And when you look at studies, that they show that if you look at economic development as this like precursor to sustainability, by paying producers a fair wage, they're actually able to implement more environmentally friendly practices on their farm. And so the work that we're doing at Bellwether really spans across the entire supply chain. So starting with paying producers fair wages so that they're able to invest in their environmental impact at the farm level, to really dismantling how the coffee sector currently roasts coffee to deepen the environmental impact of the coffee industry at the consumption level as well. So that is my formal presentation, but I would love to open it up to Q&A because I'm sure there's a lot, and I'd love to get more into like the nitty-gritty of how our roaster works and answer any questions that people have. I will stop sharing my screen so that I can see.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Grayson. That was super informative, like so much detail per slide. And we've got quite a few questions in the Q&A that I'll look at here. And so the first one asks a question on kind of going back to the, you've touched on this a little bit, but the overall role of coffee carbon emissions like across the supply chain. And this question specifically talks about deforestation, long shipping routes, and water usage. So it seems like maybe you'd spoken to that in your slide with the Seattle and Costa Rica case study, but yeah, curious if you can dig into that aspect a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first part of that question around deforestation. So coffee producers are affected by climate change, as you can imagine. Coffee grows at a particular altitude, and as temperatures increase, farmers are being forced up the mountain, and so there's less land altogether. But deforestation itself, farmers aren't going, it's land that they've been working on for generations. They are moving further up on the mountain. But smallholder farmers traditionally aren't a huge culprit of deforestation. And then in terms of water usage for growing the crops, it totally depends on where coffee is grown. For example, in Tolima, Colombia, they're based in the mountains in the southern part of Colombia. They have natural aquifers that water all of their crop. So again, pretty location dependent. And what's cool about being able to actually roast coffees that are grown in an origin, at origin, is that traditionally you've actually seen that coffee, the quality coffee that's grown at origin is all exported, and that there's a coffee culture because people work in coffee, but there isn't the same, like third wave coffee that we've seen in the United States that exist at origin. And so it is this like offers this really great opportunity to not only decrease the environmental impact of coffee roasting, but to really be able to create a new coffee culture in coffee growing countries as well. And so coffee around the world is shipped on, it's milled in country, and then it's shipped on in big containers across the world to, in the United States, the big ports exist in Oakland and New Jersey. And so, but coffee at the mill at origin is packed in grain pro bags and then into a burlap sack, put into a container, shipped to port. And then by dismantling the hub and spoke model, you're actually able to save on those packaging and to save on transportation in the United States, because you don't have to repackage it into smaller bags, and you can just ship it directly to where it's going to be roasted.
Excellent. Thanks for that clarification. There's another question that is coming in regarding digging in a little bit to the scenario of, again, kind of talking about shipping. And there's a question specifically about shipping emissions comparing unroasted coffee, and if unroasted has additional weight, and if that affects emissions.
Yeah, so there's moisture loss that happens with roasting, going from green coffee to roasted coffee. So there is a small amount of emissions that would be associated with shipping roasted coffee versus green coffee. I don't have the data on hand to say exactly what that looks like, but I can definitely put my email in the chat and follow up if that's of interest.
Awesome. Great. And then there's a couple questions here diving in a little bit deeper into the technology. And there's actually, yeah, quite a few questions here. So I'll just kind of start with from the top of this sort of tech flavored question, if you will. So the overall arching question is kind of how does the technology work? For example, how much fresh air is needed? This person writes that they heard recirculation right in the presentation, and so question regarding how what temperatures are needed to effectively roast. And there's a couple more caveats there, but I'll pause it there, which is around recirculation and temperature, and then maybe I'll dive into some of the other questions.
Okay, cool. So I think I'll take it a step back to actually like talk about the machine itself a little bit. So the machine I mentioned is about the size of a refrigerator. So you plug it in, and then there's a screen that's on the roaster that enables you to roast without any prior knowledge of roasting. So if you think about a traditional natural gas powered roaster, it's like an oven, like a gas oven, where you can have a recipe and you can put in onions and garlic and zucchini or whatever else, and I could be doing the same recipe and somebody else could be doing the same recipe, and we're probably going to come out with slightly different end results because you're manually driving the oven or the stove. And that's the same with natural gas powered roasters. You're putting coffee beans into the big like drum of the coffee roaster, and you're adjusting the temperature of the natural gas powered roaster to get the roast curve that you want. And the Bellwether roaster, it's all done on a screen. We have a team who profiles all of the coffees that we get, and so when you go to your screen and you say, okay, I want to roast a Guatemalan coffee on medium, you click a few buttons, you load the hopper with 6 pounds of green coffee, and the machine tracks the roast curve to get the desired result. The temperature of coffee, which was part of that question, depends if you're roasting a light, medium, dark, or espresso roast. But because of the technology, all of that, the temperature stays within the machine because it's recirculated, and it's pulling in ambient air. And so there's not like a required amount of fresh air that's needed to operate the Bellwether roaster.
Very cool. Thanks for that context. It sounds like it's just like I'm imagining this just like step up in technology, right? Of the capabilities of this machine. Going
totally.
off of this,
like on my first day at Bellwether, I was the founder and he was like, "You're gonna roast a batch of coffee on the Bellwether," and I was like, "I've never roasted coffee in my life except when I was in the Peace Corps and we roasted on a stovetop." And I was actually like, as everybody else, you can operate an iPad, and so it was super easy and very straightforward to get the result that you wanted for a great cup of coffee.
Cool. So maybe lowering the bar in terms of folks who have accessibility to doing roasting, at home, or I don't know how, if it's at that level, but yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's 6 pounds of coffee, so not the home level unless you have a huge coffee addiction.
But or like your little neighborhood cooperative, yeah.
Totally, but definitely accessibility is key to our mission. We actually have a lot of customers who accessibility is one of the reasons why they bought it. They're working with adults with special needs who are able to work at the coffee shop and run the roaster without having needed any direct training.
Very cool. So going back to the technology and to the machine itself, there's the question here that was building off of the last one. going into the peak operating kilowatts that the machine needs. And then there's a little caveat here, which is a couple things. To save energy, have you considered preheating any fresh air requirements with heat pumps? And then going on from here, any concerns from customers with spiking their electrical peak demand? And there's more context here saying the challenge is if a customer sets their peak electrical demand that is likely in place for the year, so they're charged for that, they may want to consider operating any electrical resistance at opportune times so as not to coincide with the air conditioning peak cooling load, for example, in the Central Valley of California in August, right? And then just a note here that this person is super excited for this presentation and sends their thanks.
Awesome, thank you. So I might have lost some of that, so hopefully.
Yeah, sorry, that was kind of a lot.
No problem.
The first was KW, and then heat pumps.
Okay, KW, I am going to point people towards our product guide that has all the like technical information, which for complete transparency is like a bit over my head. But our R&D team and manufacturing team, they've worked with our marketing team to create a great product guide that can give you all of the nitty gritty on kilowatts needed to operate the Bellwether. In terms of the operating at peak times of the day, we are in the process of creating a sustainability resource guide for our customers. If you think about, roasting in the middle of the day in California, you're most likely roasting when the grid is powered by renewables versus when everybody gets home from work to do it then. But a bit of it has to also fit into, they are roasting, but the benefit of roasting on a Bellwether is that you're able to start a roast, still pull espressos for people, that it doesn't have to be this separate labor stream, that you can do it, that you can roast coffee while you're running your business as well. And so we want to offer our customers opportunities to deepen their environmental impact, whether it's, installing solar on your roof or roasting at opportune times of the day. But it does, at the end of the day, like, people are running a business. And so it has to also, it's kind of all these different parts and pieces that have to come together that make sense for somebody's business model.
Very cool. Awesome. So tons of questions coming in. There's kind of two that I'm seeing around. Two questions regarding what's the highest temperature it can get to, the Bellwether, and also regarding temperature, what approximate temperatures are needed for roasting the darkest roast?
Okay, let's see. I'm gonna.
And this person, as you maybe look, says we're currently roasting on a San Fran, and our average drop temp is 500 plus, in parentheses, not dark roast.
Got it. Let's see. I'm gonna try to pull up our product guide, but would also be happy to connect somebody specifically looking to see if the roaster fits their coffee roasting needs to somebody else on our team that is knows kind of like the ins and outs
of that, yeah, that technical side of things. Very cool.
Yeah, let me ping the team and see if I can get it while we're on here, and then maybe we want to move to another one of the questions if there are more.
For sure. Well, I appreciate that level of multitasking as you're as you're live on camera, right? Because there are some other questions too. I've already mentioned heat pumps, I think once in this so far, but there's a clarification of whether the Bellwether uses heat pump technology or if it's electric resistance that is the heating mechanism.
Okay, I just have a colleague who's on the line who came in with the help for the Q&A.
Amazing.
450 max temp.
450. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
And then I missed the last question. I clearly wasn't multitasking well. So can you
Yeah, totally.
get me
Yeah,
that one again?
I wonder if it's even possible, like our brains are capable of yeah, that's like a, anyway. The question was regarding the heating source, of whether it's electric resistance or if it's heat pumps. And then another person is curious, this is another, apart from that, if heat pumps could be used for this application.
I don't know the answer to that, but let me write it down. And that is outside of my purview, but I can see if I can get an answer for somebody, probably after the webinar. But again, my email is Grayson, Grayson, @bellwethercoffee.com. So anybody feel free to reach out to me and we can dive into some of these.
Very cool. And we can make
questions about the technology.
Yeah, we can also make your email available readily to folks.
Awesome.
Very cool. Okay, so let's see. There was a question back into sort of the technology itself. Somebody is curious to know the max amount of pounds per day that Bellwether can roast, and the broader context to this question is wanting to know how scalable it is for larger roasteries.
Great question. So what we recommend is that, actually what we kind of like do the math for is there's, it's 10 pounds per hour. And then you could imagine that somebody's roasting 8 hours a day. And so the math that we usually run is 40 hours a week.
Awesome. All right. Another question getting into the cost. So this question is, how much does a Bellwether cost? The follow-up is, well, two follow-ups. Is the cost comparable to a natural gas roaster? If it's not at cost parity yet, have you encountered that the price tag might be a barrier for more people accessing the Bellwether?
So we find that our customers actually save money from roasting on a Bellwether. Again, the cost of our machine is slightly higher than a natural gas powered roaster, but you don't need all the permitting and installing ventilation and other costs that are associated with natural gas powered roasters. And so there's a few different scenarios to look at the actual cost of a Bellwether. And so that's one, if you're directly comparing a new install for a Bellwether versus a natural gas powered roaster. The other scenario is that we find that a lot of our customers are actually buying wholesale coffee and then brewing it in-house. And so if you switch from buying wholesale to roasting in-house, you're looking at a huge opportunity to save, because the green coffee that we sell is, $4 or $5 per pound green. And so even if you include if you like break out the cost of the roaster and electricity per pound, compared to paying $12 per pound for wholesale coffee, there's huge opportunities to save there.
Very cool. Thanks for that. All right, so now I think I've got some categories around the flavor of the coffee, which I'm excited to talk about. So a couple things is, what about the flavor is the question. Do you all have the same flavor and quality compared to results from a gas coffee roaster?
Yeah, we actually did a blind taste testing when we first started roasting on the Bellwether, and we actually found that people preferred the Bellwether coffee compared to others, but it's the same quality coffee that you would get from a natural gas powered roaster. The flavor itself, a lot of that's going to come from how you're sourcing coffee beans. So if you if you have one of the Bellwether roasters, you also have access to our green coffee marketplace. And so we have an entire coffee team who curates our menu to have everything from natural Ethiopians to, we source coffee from all over the world, from Latin America, from East Africa, from Indonesia.
Awesome. That's really cool to hear. There was a question here regarding if there are herbal infused coffee beans in your marketplace.
We do not have any herbal infused coffee beans in our marketplace. We do have a lot of like fun naturals that are pretty fruit forward. So that might be something that worth trying.
Very cool. Awesome. So great. Here's another question that says, in my mind, Bellwether roasters are the Tesla of roasters. In this respect, are there different models to follow, and will it be possible to roast off grid with battery power? Is this viable as a commercial business?
So currently we just have one model, but we do hear a lot that the Bellwether is the Tesla of coffee roasters. So we just have one model right now that roasts 6-pound batches at a time. And we haven't explored other options of doing a battery powered coffee roaster yet, but we're just getting started. So keep following us and we'll see what the future holds.
Very cool. Another question here says, do you also have or provide a recipe for us to mix and roast coffee when we purchase green coffee beans from your company?
We definitely have blends in our marketplace and provide profiles for the blends that we sell in our marketplace. But we're also happy we have a coffee team and we have a customer success team that can really help people curate their coffee programs to meet their needs.
Excellent. And remind me again, there's like the functionality of the screen and sort of kind of like helps guide you through the process. Are there sort of recipes built into the software? I don't know if I'm like explaining that right, but how does that work?
Exactly. So within the screen, there's a few different functionalities. You can buy coffee from our green coffee marketplace, and then that's also kind of like the hub for where you'll roast. And so you can call them recipes. They're roast profiles. And so you use the screen to be able to choose which coffee you want to roast. And based on the roast level and that particular coffee, we've pushed profiles to your system. And so there's profiles that match the coffee that you're roasting. And the software behind that does all the roasting for you.
Very cool.
But then other people, if they want to get into roasting more, are able to create their own profiles as well.
Okay, so there's like the stock profile and then there's like the customizable
Exactly.
option. Okay, that's cool. Awesome. So a question here regarding the 6 pounds that you referenced. Says, if you use 6 pounds of green coffee to start, how much do you have after the roast?
You're getting about 5 pounds after.
Okay.
Accounting for moisture loss.
Cool, about 5. Excellent. Great. So there's a couple more questions from a little bit earlier, kind of switching gears for a moment back to kind of the sort of environmental impact seen broadly kind of throughout the life cycle, throughout the supply chain of the coffee. The question asks, does Bellwether have traceability for the coffee that you sell? And if so, how far down the chain, I imagine the supply chain, and then the third aspect of the question is, what software or technology do you use, I imagine, to ensure traceability?
We actually focus a lot more on transparency from where our coffee comes from rather than traceability. And there has been a big trend in the coffee industry to look at traceability, to see that, end consumers can see where their coffee was grown from a particular farm. But for us, farmer equity is really the key to how we source our coffee, are kind of like the North Star for how we source our coffee. And so we really focus on transparency and the ability to know that we paid farmers a fair price. And so we work there's not a technology in place. We have relationships with green coffee importers and with coffee producers themselves, where we're really able to dig in. It's me sometimes WhatsApping a cooperative manager in Colombia or Peru or Guatemala. And it's really working with them to find out how much the coffee producers who belong to their producer group were paid. And then we work with our importers. So it's opening up the books across the supply chain to know how much coffee producers were being paid, what were the exporting fees, what's the importer's profit margin, how much we were paying, and then how much we're charging our customers. And then also relaying that information directly back to producers. So not just having transparency one way, but really doing that two-way transparency so that coffee producers understand how value is distributed as well.
Okay. Yeah, so it sounds like there's more of sort of a person-centric approach rather than like focusing on the bean. You're focusing on the folks who grow the bean. Would that be sort of an accurate like characterization?
Exactly. Yeah, and it does focus on the bean as well. Quality
Sure.
is huge
or.
when it comes to coffee, but we look at these living income based pricing as the pricing floor. And so this is the minimum amount that a coffee producer needs to be able to pay to live a dignified life. And then there's quality that comes on top of that as like a price premium that's paid on top of that living income based pricing.
Excellent. Very cool. Okay, a couple more questions here. Kind of back to the technology, back to the roasting using the Bellwether. Two questions. One, is it safe to start roasting from someone's garage? And they say, P.S. we never park our cars in the garage.
We actually do have a couple of customers who roast in their garage. I think it depends on what your local regulations are.
Awesome. And then a question, another sort of technical question. The question is, where does the moisture exhausted from roasting go?
There's a can that has a more technical term that's at the bottom that catches all of the water. And so if you're roasting on it, you have to change it out with some frequency.
Okay. Awesome. And then another question back to the taste aspect of it. The question is, are there taste profiles associated with the coffee profiles?
Yes. So if you buy coffee from our marketplace, you get like package about the coffee. So you see who it was grown by, what the flavor profiles are, which depend a bit on your roast level. So we'll have like the flavor for the flavors associated with a light roast versus a dark roast, the elevation, if there's any certifications associated with that particular coffee, and then a farm story. So you really know the person behind the coffee that you're drinking.
Oh, very cool. Awesome. Well, I'm so glad that we had this much time for Q&A to really dig into these questions. Looks like I've gotten down the list, I think, of questions. I guess one just came in. There's a question that says, can the roaster get overheated if you roast back to back after you clean it up?
So there is some downtime that the roaster needs to cool down before you can start the next roast to prevent it from overheating.
Okay. And another question, can someone view the marketplace origins, availability, and transparency that you mentioned without owning a Bellwether roaster?
If you go to our website, we have a whole page on our marketplace and on our coffee buying principles, and we have a couple of coffees on there that show that are like highlights of how we buy coffee.
Very cool. Excellent. Well, is there anything? It looks like we've reached the end of the questions coming in. I'll give kind of a last call for questions, and as I do that, Grayson, are there any I don't know, final thoughts or parting words before we close out the webinar?
Yeah, I'd say if you want to learn more about us, don't hesitate to reach out. I can be a first resource and then connect you to the appropriate members of my team, so we can, we're always happy to chat about coffee roasting and where we think the coffee industry is going, and yeah, all things sustainability and coffee related.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for making yourself available. Of course, thank you for your time today. And wanted to say, just from our side of things, again, just an announcement that our slides for this talk and the recording itself will be posted to our member portal. That I want to invite you all to check out our next webinar series in July, as we mentioned, with Rewiring America. And with that, I will close the webinar and say thank you all so much for coming, and we'll see you next month. And thank you again, Grayson. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, take care.